Hello and welcome. I'm Remington. Thanks for tuning in. So I'm back home in Michigan visiting my parents for a couple days. So that's why you see my mom's books behind me and not my books. I also wanted to give a quick word of thanks to From the Heart, both for his kind words that he's shared with me as well as the shout out that he gave me on his channel. It was very kind of him. He more does like graphic novels and that kind of thing. So if that's something you'd be interested in, you should check him out. I'll put all his info down below in the description. So people read books for a lot of different reasons. Some people are just trying to learn something, some people are just trying to relax, and some people are just trying to escape from reality. And whichever one of these is your main reason, that is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I do want to challenge you to think about possibly doing a couple things. First of all, just in general, reading books that will either challenge something that you believe or something in you personally. Secondly, maybe even some books that you know you're going to disagree with and you won't like. So there's multiple reasons that I read. Some of the ones that I already stated, as well as the main reason basically just being that I want to gain knowledge and improve myself. I mostly want to read a mixture of classic literature, fiction, pop science, maybe some political theory, as well as some history in there. And I want to get to some philosophy books as well. These are the kind of books that I think will help me become the person that, or at least more like the person that I want to be. Of course, with the added benefit that I also really enjoy most of these books. Books have changed me more than anything else in my life, really. Even if I didn't have something that I could take away from every individual book, so many of them left me with things that have stayed with me and that have changed me as a person. Even if I couldn't quite wrap my head around it at the time, they've all made me into who I am today, really. I kind of think of Uncle Iroh's quote, "It's important to draw wisdom from many places. If you draw it from just one, it becomes rigid and stale." Reading broadly can be difficult. You know, sometimes you're going to come across those books that you're not into. You don't like them, and they're making you think about things that you don't want to think about. You know, not every book is going to be as easy to read as like The Hunger Games, but those harder books always leave you with something a little bit more. So to help illustrate my point a little bit, I'm going to talk about a few of the books that I've read that have really challenged me to either reassess my situation or to just think about things that I would not have otherwise thought about. First of all, How to Think by Alan Jacobs. No other book has had such a huge effect on my life as this one has. I think I read it probably 4.5, maybe 5 years ago now, but it has still stuck with me to this day. It's not my favorite book. That title still belongs to Blankets by Craig Thompson, but it is definitely the one that has changed me the most. I mean, when I read it, it really turned my world upside down. Like, I had to reevaluate basically everything I had believed before I read it. The book is basically a sociology slash epistemology book. Alan Jacobs is a Christian writer, and many of his other books focus specifically on Christianity, but this one takes just a broader look at believing things in general. The book deals with tribalism, with bias, with indoctrination, and really gets to the roots of why people believe the things that they believe. All the terrible reasons, really. And I'm not talking about Christianity specifically or anything specifically. I'm just talking about the reasons of why people arrive at things. Even if the thing is completely true, you can believe in it for the complete wrong reasons. The book really embraces empiricism and skepticism and really encourages the reader to reevaluate why they stand where they stand. The book is pretty much just Alan Jacobs giving you permission to reassess everything you've ever believed. For me, I read this book at a really timely time in my life because about 4 or 5 years ago when I was reading it, that was when I was really struggling with my former faith, and I just felt like I couldn't do it anymore. And this book really gave me the permission, I feel like, to really question it and to really evaluate my positions and why I held them. And that absolutely terrified me when I was younger. I thought I was going to lose everything if I did that. But this book gave me the courage to actually think it through. And I think that's what's so special about this book is Alan Jacobs, he doesn't care what you believe. He cares why you believe it. He wants you to truly understand it. He wants you to think about it critically and to not give in to all the social pressure surrounding it. He doesn't want you to be caught up in the power of bias and tribalism and indoctrination. This book will challenge your beliefs. It'll challenge you to have really good reasons to back up everything that you've ever thought. This book will make you think, really. This book has meant so much to me, and I really cannot recommend it high enough. All right, next up, we got Free Will by Sam Harris. And I promise I'm not crazy, but free will is kind of an illusion. Hear me out. I know that this sounds insane. Of course we have free will. Of course, if you put a glass of water and a glass of milk in front of me, I can choose which one I want. And well, you can. The question really is, why did you choose, let's say, the glass of milk? Why did you choose the milk? Could you have chosen otherwise, or were you predestined to drink the milk? And this is what this short little book is about. It's, if I remember correctly, it's under 100 pages, written by Sam Harris. He's a neuroscientist, and he shares some not only philosophical but also physiological reasons as to why free will is kind of bogus. There's a couple really cool experiments that he talks about in here that just really drive the point home that the choice is already made before we are consciously making it. And to be clear, we can make decisions. I'm not saying that we are acted upon by like an outside force or something. I'm just saying the part of us that feels like we're making the decision, the part of us that is up, the conscious part, is not the part that's doing it. It's happening subconsciously. Sam Harris also dives into determinism a little bit and the philosophy behind that a little bit in here. The book is, like I said, it's short and it's pretty easy to understand and it's pretty concise. It's not too heavy. Even somebody who's new to philosophy could read it, and I think they would come away with just about the full story. You know, there's nothing in here that's super hard to complex. It's a wild thought, and it's hard to wrap your head around, but the reasons as to why free will is an illusion are not complicated. And of course, the lack of free will existing does have many implications on our own lives. But Sam Harris in this book, he mostly focuses on the prison reform aspect of this. If a prisoner, he makes the example of somebody who has a tumor in their head that causes them to do violence. If you remove the tumor, then they never would have committed the violent act in the first place, and they'll never do it again after you remove the tumor. So are they really responsible for that? That's the question that he raises, and I think he answers it pretty well. Next up, The Good Great Thing by Andrew Klavan. This book drove me wild. I did not like this book one bit. I don't think that it was written poorly or that it's a bad book necessarily. I'm not really a fan of Andrew Klavan or the Daily Wire crowd in general, but that is not the problem that I had with this book. The problem that I had with this book is Andrew Klavan, when he was younger, he was extremely pretentious and very full of himself in a very sick way. And he's very open about it in the book. But just the pomposity that is overflowing from this book really turned me off to it in a weird way. I said about Christopher Hitchens in one of my other videos that he's really the only author who I can stand being very pompous and full of themselves. I don't know why he gets a pass and why when Andrew Klavan does it, it bothers me so much, but it really does. He talks about so many of his flaws that he had when he was younger and to some degree still has. And I see them in myself, a lot of them, and that's the main thing that bothered me, is just being called out on my own flaws. This book was recommended to me by a friend. I would not have picked it up on my own because, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the Daily Wire crowd, but I'm very glad that I did read it because it basically just held a mirror up to my face and told me to be better. As far as the book itself, it's nothing particularly special. It's just the story of him growing up and becoming a writer. And going from being a secular Jew to an atheist to a Christian. And as far as the transformation goes, I didn't find his reasoning particularly compelling, but oh well, that's fine. Because I did at least come away with something completely different, which is just realizing that I need to fix some things that I do in my life. Next up, we have another one by Sam Harris, The Moral Landscape. This book really frustrated me. In full transparency, I have not finished it yet. I think I was a little bit more than a third of the way through it, and looking at the chapters, it seemed like it was going to be very repetitive, talking about the same thing from different perspectives, and at the time, I felt like I had come away with everything that I needed to glean at the time. But this is something that I am now planning on going back and finishing. This book was basically just an argument against moral anti-realism. And this is not a philosophy video, but I will explain it briefly. Moral anti-realism is basically the belief that morals are not inherent to reality. They come from value statements which are inherently subjective. Therefore, you cannot state that you have an objective morality because the value statements which you base your morality on are not objective. The philosopher Hume's is-ought fallacy comes up a lot in this book. And Harris does acknowledge that he cannot technically get past Hume's is-ought fallacy problem, but he claims that it doesn't matter. Because basically he says that Hume's is-ought fallacy is boring and not useful. That's the crux of his argument. And although I do think Sam Harris certainly has a point in his arguments, I think that that is a terrible way to argue for them. You know, something being boring or not useful has no impact on if it's true or not, and I would expect Sam Harris to know as much. I'm honestly still not sure where I fall on the issue of morality. I think there are some points to be made with this argument, but at the same time, I don't know. I need to put a lot more thought into it, and so that's part of the reason why I'm going to finish the book. It's really hard to get into this without explaining a lot more details about the philosophy behind this. If that's something you're interested, let me know. Maybe I'll do a full video after I finish the book. But basically, it comes down to this. Before I read this book, I thought I had morality completely figured out. And Harris raises some good reasons to think that, you know, it's not that simple. You know, maybe you don't know more than the philosophers who have been thinking about this for long before you were around. You know, I'm just a little baby when it comes to philosophy. I've only just started to actually dig into the literature. So to think that I have something figured out was very prideful of me. The next book we're going to talk about is The Courage to Be Disliked, and this book drove me absolutely crazy. Honestly, I don't think that this is a good book. I don't think that it's written well. I don't think it makes its points well, and I completely disagree with the philosophy that it has within it. But no other book has stayed with me and made me think about it more than this book has. The book is about Adlerian psychology, which is based off the works of Alfred Adler. And a quick disclaimer, so far this is my only run-in with Adlerian psychology, so I am no means an expert on it. I think that it's probably misused in the book from what I understand of it, but more research needs to be done before I could say for sure. So I'll give you a quick and dirty explanation of what the book is really getting at. So you've probably heard of this guy, Freud. He came up with the idea that humans are basically a product of their environment, of their past and their trauma and everything that's happened to them that has created the person that is here today. And that if you look back in somebody's life, you can address all the problems that they have now based off of what caused them in their past. And this other guy, Adler, was like, nope, that's not it. The past does not exist. Trauma, not a thing. You know, your problems are in front of you. They're not behind you. You are setting goals for yourself that are making you unhappy. You're choosing the wrong route in front of you, not behind you. You're just making excuses you don't actually want to change. The book is very brash and unapologetic in its demeanor, but it's really just trying to drive home the point that you can change, you just need to want to change. The book is really trying to drive home the point that you, current you, is the cause of all of your failures and all of your unhappiness. Not your past, but you right now, the decisions that you're making now. And the things that have happened to you in the past has no impact on that. Any outside factors or problems are just excuses that you're making because you don't want to change. And I disagree with that pretty strongly. The one thing that I will give the book is, although I don't think it's factually true, it can certainly be a helpful mindset to have when you're trying to change, because believing that you can change is the first step towards changing. I really don't think that the book is well written, like I said, and I don't think it makes good arguments either. So it's written as a Socratic dialogue between an old philosopher and a young man. And the young man is the outsider who doesn't know anything about this and is basically just being taught this by the old man. And he takes on a very adversarial approach. He does not like the philosophy and he doesn't want to accept it. But all of the questions that he raises, all of his doubts, all the problems that he has with it are just pushover questions that are answered so easily. And I found myself having so many more questions that the book just completely glossed over. I think it's pretty clear that the writers of the book didn't actually address any real criticisms. They didn't actually talk to anyone who didn't believe it. They just came up with some easy questions that they might have had of why somebody might not believe this, and they didn't actually dig into it very much, or at least that's what it feels like. The book really presents this as a matter-of-fact kind of thing, and I think if I look into it more, I'm probably going to find that it's more of a mindset that is recommended and not a description of reality as it feels like it's being sold in the book. Because to say that trauma doesn't exist, that the past has no effect on you, is very outlandish and just, I feel like, laughs in the face of reality. You know, you're definitely a product of your past and all your experiences, but that doesn't make you subject to them. You know, that doesn't mean that you can't make decisions that defy them. I do believe that people can change. I know that's kind of contradictory to what I was talking about earlier with free will, but it is possible. And like I said, the first step is believing that you can change. That is necessary. I could talk about this at length for quite a while. So if this is something you're interested, I could make a video all about this too, but this video is already getting pretty long, so I'm gonna move on. So the last book that I want to talk about is Why Vegan by Peter Singer. I just read this one over the course of a couple days right before I came here. And although this book didn't exactly change anything for me, it definitely inspired me to want to read more literature on the topic of veganism. Basically, the stance that I've had for a while is animal suffering is needless and we should do what we can to solve it. I don't take a full animal rights approach. I don't think that we necessarily need to place animals on the same level as humans. I don't think we need to value them the same. I don't by any means think that that would be a bad thing for us to do. I just think in terms of necessity and priorities, it's a little low on the totem pole. I am 100% behind eating less meat and less animal products, both for the environment as well as for the animal suffering aspect of it, because factory farming is just a horrible practice. But Peter Singer has not completely converted me to being a vegan. This was just a really little book, basically just a collection of different writings that he's written over the year. Just really like an introduction. Like, here's a bunch of excerpts from things that I've written. If this is compelling, here's a bunch more that you can go read. And one thing that I really appreciated about the book was it felt like Peter Singer was giving you different levels of action. He understands that not everybody is going to go full vegan right off the bat. And although he very much says that that would be the ideal and that is what we should do, he understands that not everybody can or wants to make that change. And so he gives different steps, different approaches that you can take, different measures. You can eat less meat, you can eat different kinds of animal products, you can join social movements. There's a lot of different things that you can do without fully committing to completely changing your diet overnight. Understanding the issue does not mean that you need to become a vegan animal rights activist. I really appreciate that he doesn't take an all or nothing kind of approach. He is okay with progress being progress. He doesn't need everybody to adopt the beliefs that he has, although he is very clear that that is an ideal and everybody should. He's not going to try and force everybody to. He's going to try and just get people to do whatever good they are okay with doing, which I think is probably the right approach. But like I said, I'm open to reading a lot more from him in the future, and I could be convinced even more than I am now.
The rest of the video that I recorded the other day just didn't save for whatever reason, but at least I got most of it. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you want to do algorithm things down below, go ahead and do so. If you have any comments or criticism, feel free to let me know. And if not, I'll see you in the next one. I really appreciate it. Bye.